I hope you all had a good Thanksgiving, and we're going to be quick today so you can go back to watching the World Cup. We had a great discussion in our caucus. We had a lot to discuss as we embark on the final stretch of the 117th Congress, and it was a very good discussion on the rules changes. Now, first on the docket is the passage for respect for marriage, giving millions of Americans equal justice under the law, peace of mind knowing their right to marry the person they love is protected. Passing the bill is our chance to send a message to Americans everywhere, no matter who you are, or who you love. You too deserve dignity and equal treatment under the law. As you know, this is personal to me. In 2020, right after the passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, we were at a family dinner, and my daughter and her wife were distraught and asked me, could our marriage be undone? Today, a new day has come for them, and in the new year, they'll be welcoming their first child, my third grandchild, God willing, in a few months. With the passage of this bill, though, I think not just about them and the millions of Americans it'll impact, but about my future grandchild. That child will now grow up in a more accepting, inclusive, and loving world, a world that will honor their mother's marriage and give it the dignity it deserves. And I want to thank Senator Baldwin, who is here, as well as Senator Sinema and Senators Collins, Portman, and Tillis for helping us get this bill passed and doing such a great job in rounding up the votes and putting together a compromise that the Senate finds acceptable. And thank you above all to the American people, and I mean this. Thank you to the American people, the vast majority of whom have understood that the inexorable march to equality is what America is all about. There are some hateful voices out there, but in general, Americans understand this. God bless them. So, yes, it's a great day for Americans, but a great day for our future generations of Americans as well. Now, on the Omni, we have to pass an omnibus, not just to fund the government and keep our country moving, but to keep us innovating, to keep our country safe, ensure we're providing for our troops and our veterans. At the White House this morning, the four leaders and the President, we had a very good discussion about the omnibus, and we all agreed that the best option is to avoid a pointless and painful shutdown and to work together. A continuing resolution doesn't cut that. It clearly hurts our military. It clearly hurts our national security. It clearly undercuts our great men and women in the armed forces, and Jack will talk about that in a minute. And so Leader McConnell and I think everyone wants an omnibus. We have different views of what should be in the omnibus. But we have agreed, the four leaders and the four heads of the appropriations committees, to sit down very shortly and begin thrashing out how we can come together and get an omnibus done. That doesn't mean we have agreement on where it should be. That doesn't mean it's a done deal at all. But it means the door is open now to discussing an omnibus, which it wasn't a few days ago, because no one knew where everybody was at. Okay? And one final thing I just have to mention, I did on the floor yesterday, the former president and his dinner companion. Now he says, well, he didn't know that Kanye West, bad enough he was meeting with Kanye West, but he didn't know that this virulent anti-Semite, this vicious man, Fuentes, was coming to dinner. But now he knows he was at dinner and he still hasn't denounced him. That is just an utter disgrace. That is un-American. That is not what any leader of any party, of any philosophy should do. I do praise many in the Republican Party and many in the Jewish community who supported the President Trump in the past, for condemning him, but we're still waiting. The silence is deafening and appalling. Senator Reid.
Well, I certainly concur with Senator Schumer's in calling for our Republican colleagues to seriously negotiate an appropriations bill for 2023. As it stands, if we have a continuing resolution, it will be a disaster for our military personnel. First, defense spending will be about $62 billion lower than the level set out in our Senate bipartisan NDAA bill. And I'll emphasize bipartisan. In practice, this means the Defense Department will operate with at least $3 billion per month less than the level President Biden requested for fiscal year 2023. And the damage would be compounded significantly by inflation. We put forward in our legislation specific funding to cover the cost of inflation. That would not be at all included in a CR. Now, the people who will really bear the burden of this disastrous mistake of doing a CR are the men and women of the military forces. This CR would delay investment in barracks, infrastructure, child care centers. 97 new projects totaling $5.7 billion would not go forward. And further, the 4.6% pay raise that we've included in the National Defense Authorization Act on the Senate side, that would not be funded because the funds would not be available. Second major issue here is that this would cripple our ability to modernize the forces of our military. Under a CR, there can't be any new starts for acquisition programs or military construction projects. 192 new start efforts in procurement and R&D and 49 procurement rate increases would be prohibited. This was aptly described by General Berger, the Commandant of the Marine Corps. As he said, a CR is the last thing a force seeking to accelerate modernization needs. It represents a return to the budget uncertainty that has plagued the department for more than a decade. In effect, we'd be forcing our services to invest in legacy equipment, and this is simply congressionally mandated waste. Also, at this perilous moment in the world, a CR would cause a $5 billion shortfall in modernization efforts. And given these realities, we're in a situation that this would do significant harm to our national security. As General Brown, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, said, all the money in the world cannot buy more time. Time is irrecoverable when you are working to keep pace against the well-resourced and focused competitors. Time matters, and we are wasting time at the expense of our soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, and guardians. The time has come to move on this bill, to get an omnibus, to make sure that our forces have the tools they need, the resources they need, and send the message that we are ready to defend the nation. Thank you.
All right, we have an announcement from the
Oh, wait, I think he was offsides.
Oh, he thought first said 2-0, but not so, not yet.
Kind of like getting past closure.
I want to follow up with what Jack Reed said as chairman of the Defense Subcommittee on Appropriations. I will tell you that this bill should have been done in September. We are where we are today, and we need to get it done now. The omnibus bill is critically important for everything in the government. From a defense standpoint, here's what it will do. It will add uncertainty and unpredictability. Anytime you have that, that is a recipe for failure. It's why Secretary Austin said we can't compete with China with a CR. And he's 100% correct. From hypersonic weapons to the ships in the sea, it all gets put on hold. If we want to keep this country safe, if we want to maintain our military advantage, this bill has to pass, and it has to pass now. Not after another CR, not after Christmas, but right now. Sides need to come together. They need to get a top-line number, and if we do, it will be one of the most important things we have done this Congress. And we've done a lot of important things, but this is critically important for the safety of our nation.
Thank you. And Senator Tester mentioned, I hear a lot of people, very conservative, saying, how are we letting Russia or China get ahead of us on hypersonic weapons?
Right.
And then they want to cut the funding so we can never get ahead of them. Senator Baldwin.
So later today, we are poised to pass the Respect for Marriage Act out of the Senate and take the next step to make marriage equality the law of the land. And right now, millions of loving couples are worried that someday their marriages may be on the SCOTUS chopping block through no fault of their own. I'm glad that our leader talked about this in very personal terms. I want, if any of you saw my floor speech 2 weeks ago, I talked about my dear friends Margaret and Denise and their daughter Maria. And I talked about what their lives were like prior to marriage equality being the law of the land. They were worried about the idea that one of them could be injured or become ill, and the other would not have access to their partner in the hospital because they would have been considered legal strangers prior to marriage equality. They struggled with health insurance because they could not cover one another through their employer-offered insurance because, again, they had no legal relationship that was recognized. And when Maria was adopted, they were so overjoyed, but only one parent was viewed legally as the parent before marriage equality. These are the concerns and anxieties and fears that the Respect for Marriage Act responds to, because we know after the Supreme Court threw out nearly 50 years of precedent in the Dobbs decision that there were other cases that were decided on similar legal and constitutional grounds as was Roe versus Wade. And that is why the Senate has stepped up and focused in on passing the Respect for Marriage Act. We have the opportunity to ease these anxieties and fears and give millions of same-sex and interracial couples the confidence and certainty that they need, that their marriages are and will in the future continue to be valid. And with the backing of the American people, we're going to provide that certainty and guarantee those rights and freedoms with the Respect for Marriage Act. Now, this afternoon, we will have several votes that we will take up. And we're going to hear from some colleagues who are supporting, I would call, fairly partisan amendments. These amendments would upend the months of good faith negotiations, and they would disrupt our carefully crafted bipartisan compromise and change the mission of our very straightforward bill. Now, I'm not going to get into the particulars and the details of the 3 amendment votes that we have, but what I would say is that our clarifying language in the substitute leaves intact religious liberties afforded under our Constitution and federal law. And we have, you don't have to take my word for it, we have the support of conservative legal scholars and a broad coalition of religious organizations. You know, a lot of people have asked me in recent days what the passage of this historic bill would mean to me as a member of the LGBTQ plus community. What I said to people who asked me a similar question back in 2012 when I was first elected to the United States Senate still rings true today. I didn't run for the Senate to make history. I ran for the Senate to make a difference. And we are not pushing this legislation to make history. We are doing this to make a difference for millions upon millions of Americans. It's a historic day, but it's going to make a difference.
Thank you, Tammy. Well done. Thank you, Tammy. Okay, go ahead.
Would you allow an amendment to deal with the workers to this railroad bill, or is it going to have to stick the way it is, the way the White House is?
Leader McConnell and I both want to pass it quickly. We understand the time deadlines, and we'll be working together to figure out the best way to get it done quickly.
Do you have the support of all Democrats to move
As I said,
very
Leader
quickly?
McConnell and I are going to sit down. We agreed to at the meeting today and figure out the best way to get it done quickly. Yes.
I know that you talked about the importance of getting an omnibus done, but Speaker Pelosi also said a year-long CR might be possible if you can. Is that a viable
we're focusing on the omnibus, and I think she would certainly make that a much higher priority than any CR, based on our discussions. Okay? Yes?
Hi. If Republicans won't help Democrats deal with the debt limit in the lame duck, are you willing to use reconciliation?
What I've said is that, and I'll say it again, the way we've done debt ceiling in the past is bipartisan. We've done it in a variety of different ways. I'd like to see it done in a bipartisan way and get it done before the end of the year.
Leader Schumer.
Yes.
Leader Schumer.
Well, this,
Leader
Leader
Schumer.
Schumer.
Leader Schumer, will there be a vote on the assault?
it's rare I point at someone, no one says anything. Usually it's three of you.
Will there be a vote on the assault weapons ban before the end of this Congress?
You know,
Do
look.
think that you have 50 Democrats to
Look, the bottom line is that I am the author of the assault weapons ban. I believe in it strongly, and we're continuing to work to see the best way we can try to get this done.
Leader Schumer.
Yes.
Will the Electoral Count Act get its own vote, or will it be attached to the NDAA or the omnibus? Or
I think there is bipartisan support for the Electoral Count Act. There are a few issues that have to be worked out. There are some differences between the House and Senate bills, but we want to get it done, and I'm optimistic that we can.
Will it ride
Last
on another
one.
bill?
Are you supporting Senator Whitehouse's rules change proposal?
All I'll say is we had a robust discussion, and there'll be a vote on Thursday. Thank you, everybody.